8-year-old Emily Reynolds had always felt safest when her father, Officer Mark Reynolds, was around. He wasn't just her dad, he was her hero. Every morning, before heading out for duty, he would ruffle her hair and give her a warm smile. "Be good today, kiddo," he'd say, strapping on his belt and adjusting the badge on his chest. But Emily knew he wasn't going to work alone. He had Shadow, his loyal canine partner, a massive black German shepherd with sharp eyes and a heart just as big as his own. Shadow wasn't just a police dog. He was family. Every night, after long hours on patrol, Mark would sit on the living room floor, laughing as Shadow licked Emily's face, his tail wagging wildly. "He loves you just as much as I do," Mark would say. "Maybe even more," Emily would giggle, wrapping her arms around the dog's thick neck. Shadow was always gentle with her, despite his size and strength. He would let her tug on his ears, rest her head against him, and even sneak him treats when her mom wasn't looking. Emily loved listening to her father's stories about their adventures. He would tell her about the times Shadow had helped him chase down bad guys, find missing people, and even save lives. One time, Mark said, his voice full of pride, "We were called to find a lost boy in the woods. It was pitch dark, and we couldn't see a thing. But Shadow, he didn't need to see. He just sniffed the air, listened carefully, and took off running. 10 minutes later, we found the kid, cold but safe." Emily's eyes widened in awe. "Shadow is a real-life superhero." Mark chuckled. "That he is." It wasn't just about the job. Shadow was there for the good days and the bad ones. If Mark ever came home looking tired or upset, Shadow would sit beside him, pressing his head into his chest, offering silent comfort. Emily had seen it happen many times. Shadow wasn't just trained to serve, he cared. Even outside of work, he was fiercely protective of Emily. When she played in the yard, Shadow would sit at the edge, ears perked up, watching her every move. If a stranger passed by, he would stand up, making sure they knew she wasn't alone. But he wasn't scary, at least not to those he trusted. At night, when Emily felt scared of the dark, Shadow would curl up beside her bed, his soft breathing helping her fall asleep. To Emily, Shadow was more than just a dog. He was a piece of her father, a guardian, a best friend. She couldn't imagine life without him. But soon, she would be forced to. One crisp autumn evening, Emily sat on the porch steps, waiting for her father to come home. She had drawn a picture of him and Shadow at work, hoping to surprise him. The sky had turned shades of orange and purple, and Shadow sat beside her, ears perked up, his eyes fixed on the road. He always seemed to know when Mark's patrol car would pull into the driveway. But tonight, something felt different. Instead of the familiar hum of an engine, the sound of distant sirens filled the air. Emily frowned, glancing at Shadow. The dog let out a low whine, shifting uncomfortably. Moments later, her mother, Sarah, stepped outside with a phone pressed against her ear. Her face was pale, her hand trembling as she gripped the railing. "Mom?" Emily asked softly, but Sarah didn't respond. She simply closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and turned to her daughter. "Sweetheart, let's go inside." Emily hesitated. "But Dad isn't home yet." Sarah knelt down, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know, baby." Emily didn't understand at first. But then, as the night stretched on, and the sirens faded, she heard voices, low, serious voices, coming from the living room. Officers from the department sat with her mother, speaking in hushed tones. Emily peeked from behind the staircase, clutching Shadow's collar as she listened. She caught a few words. Accident, line of duty, brave until the end. And then, the words that shattered her world. "He's gone." Emily felt her legs go weak. The room blurred. Her father, her hero, wasn't coming home. Shadow seemed to sense the change. He let out a deep, sorrowful whimper and nudged her with his nose. But Emily couldn't move. Tears streamed down her face as she clung to his thick fur. The days that followed felt like a blur. People came and went, offering condolences, bringing flowers, whispering words of sympathy that barely registered. Emily sat by the window, staring at the driveway, half expecting her father to walk through the door and tell her it was all a mistake, but he never did. Then, the second heartbreak came. One evening, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table, she sighed and rubbed her temples. "They're auctioning off the retired K9s next month," she said softly to a friend. "Shadow is on the list." Emily's head shot up. "Auctioning?" Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Since he's a police dog, the department can't just let us keep him. They have to follow protocol. We have to bid like everyone else. But honey, we can't afford it." Emily's chest tightened. First, she had lost her father. Now she was going to lose Shadow too. But she wasn't going to let that happen. Emily sat on her bed, hugging Shadow tightly. The thought of losing him made her heart ache. She had already lost her father. How could they take Shadow away too? The big dog rested his head on her lap, letting out a deep sigh, as if he understood what she was feeling. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she wiped them away. She couldn't just sit there and do nothing. She had to find a way to keep Shadow. That night, while her mother was asleep, Emily crept downstairs and grabbed an old coffee tin from the kitchen shelf. She took it back to her room and placed it on her desk. Using colorful markers, she carefully wrote on the side, "Save Shadow Fund." Then she emptied her piggy bank into it. The sound of coins clinking against the metal echoed in the silent room. The next morning, she counted the money, $12.75. It wasn't much, but it was a start. At breakfast, Emily took a deep breath and looked at her mother. "Mom, do you know how much they're selling Shadow for?" Sarah gave her a sad smile. "It depends on the bidding. Retired K9s can be expensive, sweetheart." Emily's stomach twisted, but she nodded. She needed more money. A lot more. Determined, she grabbed her coat and set off around the neighborhood. She knocked on doors, one by one, asking if anyone needed help with chores. She raked leaves, walked dogs, and even helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries inside. Some people gave her a few dollars, and others simply smiled and handed her spare change. At the grocery store, she spotted a jar labeled, "Take a penny, leave a penny." She stared at it for a long moment before shaking her head. No, this had to be her fight. She wasn't going to take from others. As the days passed, Emily worked harder than ever. She stayed after school to help clean classrooms, hoping for extra pocket change. She even set up a small lemonade stand, but business was slow now that summer was over. Still, she refused to give up. One afternoon, Officer Davis, a friend of her father's from the station, saw her struggling to carry a heavy bag of leaves. "What's all this about, kiddo?" he asked, his eyes filled with curiosity. Emily hesitated, then looked up at him. "I need to buy Shadow back," she admitted. "I can't lose him too." Officer Davis didn't say anything at first. He just nodded and helped her with the bag. But as he walked away, he pulled out his phone and started making a call. Emily didn't know it yet, but word was about to spread, and people were about to start paying attention. The day of the auction arrived sooner than Emily expected. She stood outside the large community hall, gripping the coffee tin tightly in her hands. It felt too light. No matter how hard she had worked, how many leaves she had raked, or how many neighbors had given her spare change, she knew it wasn't enough. Shadow sat beside her, his ears perked up, his dark eyes watching her closely. He could sense something was wrong. Emily knelt down and wrapped her arms around his thick fur. "I won't let them take you," she whispered. "I promise." Her mother gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, I know how much this means to you, but I don't want you to get hurt. Some people have a lot of money to bid today." Emily swallowed hard but nodded. She wouldn't give up without trying. Inside the hall, the room was packed. Officers, trainers, and wealthy bidders filled the chairs, all eager to claim a retired K-9. Some wanted a loyal companion. Others saw an opportunity for security. Emily felt small among them, but she refused to be intimidated. The auctioneer stepped onto the stage. "Welcome, everyone. Today, we honor our retired K-9s by finding them good homes." His voice echoed through the hall. "Let's begin." One by one, the dogs were brought out. Bids flew across the room. Hundreds, sometimes even thousands of dollars. Emily's heart pounded as the numbers climbed higher and higher. She clutched her tin of money and felt her hopes slipping away. Then finally, it was Shadow's turn. The moment his name was called, Emily stood up straight. Shadow was led onto the stage, his posture proud, his tail wagging slightly as he scanned the room. He was looking for her. "All right, folks," the auctioneer said. "Shadow is a highly trained, loyal, and intelligent K-9. Let's start the bidding at $500. Emily's breath caught in her throat. 500. That was more than she had by far. A man in a suit raised his hand. 500. Another bidder called out. 700. Emily's hands trembled. This was it. This was her moment. She took a deep breath, stood on her tiptoes, and lifted her hand as high as she could. "I bid $80.50, she shouted. The room fell silent. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. We have a bid of $80.50. His voice wavered slightly. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. The man in the suit smirked, shaking his head. "A little low, don't you think?" Emily's face turned red, but she stood firm. "Shadow was my dad's partner. He's my family." Her voice was steady. "And you can't put a price on that." The room grew quiet again, and then something happened that no one expected. Emily's words hung in the air, echoing through the silent auction hall. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but she refused to back down. Her fingers tightened around the tin in her hands as she took a shaky breath. Shadow was watching her from the stage, his ears perked, his tail still. He was waiting for her. The auctioneer cleared his throat, glancing around the room. "We have a bid of $80.50, he repeated, almost uncertainly. "Do I hear a counteroffer?" A man in the front, dressed in an expensive suit, raised his hand. $1,000, he said casually. Emily's heart sank. She had been ready for competition, but not for numbers that high. She turned toward her mother, who gave her a sad but knowing look. Sarah had warned her that some people had far more money to spend than they did, but Emily refused to give up. She took a deep breath and called out again, her voice smaller but no less determined. I don't have $1,000, she admitted, but I have this." She held up her tin, shaking it slightly so the coins rattled inside. "I worked really hard for it. And Shadow was my dad's partner. He protected him. He protected us. I don't have a lot of money, but I love him more than anyone else ever could." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people smiled softly, while others looked away, unsure of what to say. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing between Emily and the bidders. The man in the suit sighed, shaking his head as he leaned back in his chair. "This isn't about love, kid. It's an auction." Emily swallowed hard. She knew he was right. But before she could say anything else, another voice cut through the room. "I'll add 100 to her bid." Emily turned sharply to see an older woman in the back of the room standing up. She had silver hair and kind eyes, and she was looking right at Emily. A second voice spoke up. "I'll throw in 200. Emily spun around, her eyes wide. It was Officer Davis, her father's old friend. He nodded at her with a small smile before crossing his arms. Then another person stood. 300. The numbers started rising. One by one, strangers began adding to Emily's bid. 400. 500. The auctioneer's eyebrows raised in surprise as he struggled to keep up. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She looked around, realizing that something incredible was happening. People weren't bidding against her anymore. They were bidding for her. And just like that, the entire auction changed. Emily stood frozen as more and more voices called out, each adding to her bid. Her tin of coins suddenly didn't seem so small anymore. It wasn't just her fight now. It was everyone's. 600, called the man near the back. 700, shouted another. Even people who hadn't planned to bid were joining in, their voices blending together in a wave of support. Some were officers who had worked with her father, others were complete strangers, but they all understood what Shadow meant to her. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she turned to look at her mother. Sarah had a hand over her mouth, her own eyes glistening with emotion. She reached for Emily's shoulder, squeezing it gently. The auctioneer cleared his throat, clearly taken aback. "Ah, well, we now have a bid of $1,000 for Shadow." He looked around the room. Any more offers? Silence. No one raised a hand. Emily held her breath as the auctioneer lifted his gavel. Going once, going twice. The man in the expensive suit leaned forward, signing. 2,000, he said, his voice calm but firm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily felt her stomach drop. She had been so close. The room fell quiet, and for the first time, Emily felt like hope was slipping away. No one spoke. No one countered. The energy in the room dimmed. The auctioneer hesitated. $2,000. Going once. But just before he could continue, a deep voice rang out. 5,000. Emily turned sharply, her breath catching. Officer Davis had stood up again, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood several uniformed officers, men and women who had worked with her father. "We're not letting Mark Reynolds' daughter lose her dog," he said firmly. "We'll cover the cost." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. More officers nodded, some placing hands over their hearts in respect. Others pulled out wallets, ready to contribute. The man in the suit frowned, glancing around at the growing wave of support. With a small shake of his head, he sighed and raised a hand. "I withdraw my bid." The auctioneer gave a small smile, then lifted the gavel high. $5,000 going once, going twice. Sold to Emily Reynolds. The room erupted into cheers. Emily let out a shaky breath as she clutched Shadow's fur, unable to believe what had just happened. She hadn't just won the auction. She had won Shadow. And she had done it with the love of an entire community behind her. The moment the auctioneer slammed the gavel down, Emily let out a shaky breath. She had done it. Shadow was coming home. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she ran toward the stage. Shadow's ears perked up the moment he saw her. And before the handler could even unclip his leash, the massive dog lunged forward, knocking Emily over in a whirlwind of fur and excitement. "Shadow," she laughed, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. He whined and licked her face frantically, his tail wagging so hard it thumped against the wooden stage. It was as if he knew he wasn't going anywhere. He was home. The room burst into applause. Officers clapped each other on the back, some wiping away tears. Neighbors and strangers alike cheered, their voices full of warmth and joy. Emily looked up at Officer Davis, her eyes still glistening. You saved him." Davis crouched beside her, resting a hand on Shadow's back. "No, kiddo. You did." Sarah knelt beside them, pulling Emily into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Emily sniffled, gripping her mother tightly. "Dad would be too." Sarah nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart, he would." A photographer from the local newspaper stepped forward. "Would you mind if we got a picture?" Emily blinked in surprise but quickly nodded. She wiped her tears and sat up straight, placing a hand on Shadow's back. The officers gathered behind her, smiling, and just before the flash went off, Shadow let out a small, happy bark. That night, after the excitement had settled, Emily walked into her house with Shadow trotting beside her. It felt different now. Warmer, fuller. As she stepped inside, she noticed the framed photo of her father on the shelf. She smiled softly. "We did it, Dad." Shadow let out a low huff, almost as if he understood. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a little less lost. Shadow was more than just a dog. He was a piece of her father, a guardian, and a reminder that love, real, unbreakable love, never fades. As she climbed into bed, Shadow curled up beside her, just like he always had. She rested her hand on his fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She wasn't alone. And she never would be. The next morning, Emily woke up to the familiar warmth of Shadow curled beside her. For the first time in weeks, she didn't wake up with an aching feeling in her chest. Instead, she felt light, hopeful. Shadow was still here, right where he belonged. As she stretched, Shadow lifted his head and wagged his tail, letting out a soft huff. Emily giggled and scratched behind his ears. "Come on, boy. Let's go see Mom." Downstairs, Sarah was already making breakfast, the smell of bacon filling the air. When she saw Emily and Shadow enter the kitchen, she smiled. "Good morning, you two." Emily plopped into a chair, Shadow sitting obediently by her side. "Good morning." Sarah placed a plate in front of her. "You made the front page," she said with a chuckle, sliding a newspaper across the table. Emily's eyes widened as she looked at the headline, "A Little Girl's Love Saves a Hero." Below it was the photo from the auction. Emily sitting with Shadow, surrounded by the officers who had helped her. Her heart swelled as she traced the picture with her finger. Sarah sat down beside her. "People have been calling all morning. Some want to donate, some just want to say how inspired they are by you." Emily blinked. "Really?" Her mother nodded. "You showed everyone what love and determination can do." She reached over, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Emily's ear. "Your father would be so proud of you." Emily smiled, her chest filling with warmth. She looked down at Shadow, who rested his head on her lap. "I couldn't have done it without him." That afternoon, Emily and Shadow went for a walk through town. Everywhere they went, people waved or stopped to say hello. Some even handed Emily small envelopes, saying they wanted to help with Shadow's care. At the park, Officer Davis was waiting for them. He knelt down, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "How's the hero doing?" Emily grinned. "Which one? Me or him?" Davis chuckled. "Both." Then, his expression turned a little more serious. "You know, Emily, your dad was one of the best officers I ever worked with. And Shadow, he was more than just a partner. He was family. I think, in a way, he knew he had to stay with you." Emily looked down at Shadow, who gazed up at her with those deep, knowing eyes. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think so too." From that day forward, Emily and Shadow were inseparable. He wasn't just a retired K-9. He was her protector, her best friend, and the last piece of her father she could hold on to. And no matter what the future held, Emily knew one thing for sure. Some bonds could never be broken.